The morning mist hung low over Henderson Creek, curling between the bare branches of the willows like ghostly fingers reaching for something just out of grasp. I had come here to think, the way I always did when life felt too heavy to carry inside the walls of my house. The wooden bench near the old stone bridge had been my refuge for 23 years, ever since my husband Derek and I moved into the house on Maple Ridge Road, just a quarter-mile from this spot. I was 57 years old, and I had learned that some problems couldn't be solved by talking them through or praying them away. Some problems needed silence and moving water and the patience to let answers find you instead of chasing after them. That November morning, I wasn't expecting answers. I was just trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest that had been there for 3 weeks, ever since my mother's funeral. Diane Holloway had been 79 when her heart finally gave out, and while her death wasn't unexpected, the aftermath had been nothing but surprises, none of them good. My mother had been sick for almost 2 years before she died, a slow decline that started with small things, forgotten appointments, repeated questions, moments of confusion that she tried to hide but couldn't. The doctors called it vascular dementia, a gradual dimming of the sharp mind that had once been her greatest asset. I watched her fade, week by week, the woman who had raised me, disappearing behind a fog of memory loss and confusion. The last time I saw her truly lucid was 6 months before she died. I had stopped by her house on Willow Street to bring her groceries, the way I did every Tuesday and Friday. She was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, looking out at the garden she could no longer tend, and when I came in, she turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. "Meredith," she said, and her voice was clear, focused, completely present, in a way it hadn't been in months. "There are things I should have told you, things I kept hidden because I was afraid." My heart had quickened. "What things, Mom?" But even as I asked, I watched the clarity fade from her eyes, replaced by that familiar fog. She blinked, looked around the room as if she wasn't sure where she was, and then smiled at me with the vague pleasantness of someone who knows they're supposed to recognize you but can't quite place why. "Oh, Meredith, dear, did you bring the groceries? I think I'm out of milk." I had put away the groceries and made her tea and tried to pretend that moment hadn't happened. But it haunted me in the weeks that followed, and it haunted me even more after she died. What had she wanted to tell me? What secrets had she been carrying that were so heavy she needed to confess them before she slipped away for good? I would find out soon enough, though not in any way I could have anticipated. The funeral had been small, as my mother had requested, 32 people in the chapel of Grace Methodist Church, the same church where she had been baptized as an infant and married as a young woman. My sister Bridget had organized everything, insisting that I was too grief-stricken to handle the details. At the time, I had been grateful for her help. Now, 3 weeks later, I was starting to wonder why she had been so eager to take charge. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders and watched the creek flow past, its surface catching the weak autumn sunlight in flashes of silver. The water was higher than usual from recent rains, moving faster, carrying leaves and small branches toward wherever creeks go when they leave the places we know. My mother had loved this creek. When I was a child, she would bring Bridget and me here on summer afternoons, spreading a blanket on the bank while we waded in the shallows and caught crayfish with our bare hands. Those were the good years, before adolescence drove a wedge between my sister and me, before adult responsibilities made simple pleasures feel like luxuries we couldn't afford. I was thinking about one of those summer days, about the sound of my mother's laughter as she watched Bridget slip on a mossy rock and land on her backside in the water when I saw her. My sister Bridget emerged from the path on the opposite bank, about 50 yards upstream from where I sat. She was moving quickly, almost running, her dark hair loose around her face in a way that was completely unlike her. Bridget was the kind of woman who never left the house without every strand in place, every accessory coordinated, every detail considered. She was 4 years younger than me, 53, and she had spent her entire adult life cultivating an image of perfection that I had long ago stopped trying to match. I started to call out to her, to wave and ask what she was doing here so early, but something in her body language stopped me. She kept looking over her shoulder, checking the path behind her, her movements jerky and frantic. I had never seen my sister move like that. Bridget moved through life like a woman who knew exactly where she was going and expected everyone else to get out of her way. This was different. This was fear. I stayed frozen on my bench, partially hidden by the thick trunk of an old oak tree, watching as Bridget approached the edge of the creek. She was carrying something, a large leather bag, the kind she would have called a satchel, because she thought the word bag was too common. It was dark brown, expensive looking, stuffed so full that it bulged at the seams. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't have said why. Something about this scene felt wrong, deeply wrong, in a way that made my skin prickle with unease. Bridget stopped at the water's edge and looked around again, scanning the banks in both directions. I pressed myself closer to the tree, suddenly certain that I didn't want her to know I was there. The instinct was powerful, primal, the kind of feeling you learn to trust even when you can't explain it. She lifted the bag with both hands, drew her arms back, and threw it as hard as she could into the creek. The splash was louder than I expected. The bag hit the water about 10 feet from the bank and immediately began to sink, the current catching it and pulling it downstream toward where I sat. Bridget didn't wait to watch it disappear. She turned and walked away, back the way she had come, her pace just as hurried as before. Within seconds, the morning mist swallowed her, and I was alone again. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. My sister, the woman who had spent our entire lives making sure everyone knew how superior she was to me, had just thrown something into the river like she was disposing of evidence. Evidence of what? The bag was still visible, caught on a submerged branch about 20 feet from my bench, bobbing in the current. The water was trying to pull it free, but the branch held firm, and I watched as the leather darkened from the soaking. I could leave. I could walk away and pretend I had never been here, never seen anything. That would be the safe choice, the choice that kept me out of whatever trouble my sister had obviously gotten herself into. Bridget and I had never been close. Not really. Our relationship had been strained for as long as I could remember, built more on obligation than affection, held together by the thin thread of shared blood and the expectations of a mother who had wanted her daughters to at least pretend to love each other. But I couldn't stop staring at that bag. The relationship between Bridget and me had always been complicated. When we were children, before the jealousy set in, we had been close. I remembered building blanket forts in the living room, sharing secrets under the covers after our parents thought we were asleep, defending each other against playground bullies. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. Bridget had started seeing me as competition rather than an ally, measuring her worth against mine and always finding herself lacking. It wasn't true, of course. Bridget was intelligent, accomplished, beautiful. She had married Graham, a successful commercial real estate developer, and lived in a house twice the size of mine. She drove expensive cars and wore designer clothes and belonged to country clubs that would never have accepted someone like me as a member. But none of that seemed to matter to her. What mattered was that I had been born first, that I had married first, that I had children first. What mattered was that our mother called me more often, visited me more frequently, seemed to light up in a way around me that she never quite did around Bridget. I had tried to talk to her about it over the years, tried to tell her that our mother loved us both, that there was no competition, that we could be sisters without being rivals. But Bridget always brushed me off, insisted everything was fine, changed the subject to something safe and superficial. And now she had thrown a bag full of secrets into a river and run away like a criminal disposing of evidence. What could possibly be inside that she needed to destroy? My mind raced through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Stolen money? Drugs? Something connected to Graham and his business dealings, which had always seemed slightly questionable to me, even though I could never put my finger on exactly why, or something else entirely, something connected to our mother's recent death, to the estate that Bridget had been so eager to handle. She had practically pushed me aside in the days after Mom died, insisting that she would take care of everything, that I was too grief-stricken to deal with the details. At the time, I had been grateful for her help. Now, watching her throw a bag into a river, I wondered if her eagerness had been motivated by something other than sisterly concern. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was on my feet, walking toward the water's edge. The bank was muddy and slippery from the recent rains, and I had to grab onto exposed tree roots to keep my balance as I made my way down. The water was shockingly cold when it seeped through my shoes, then rose past my ankles as I waded in. The cold hit me like a slap, making me gasp. I was wearing jeans and a wool coat, neither of which was meant for wading through November Creek water. But I kept going, my eyes fixed on that bag, my determination growing with each step. The bag was heavier than I expected. The leather was already waterlogged, and whatever was inside had absorbed water too, making it awkward to lift. I managed to get my arms around it and heave it back toward the bank, my feet slipping on the rocky creek bed as I struggled to maintain my footing. At one point, I nearly went down. My left foot hit a patch of slick algae on a rock, and for a terrifying moment, I was falling, the cold water rushing up to meet me. I threw out my arm and caught myself on another branch, barely managing to stay upright. The bag slipped from my grip and started to drift away, but I lunged after it and caught the strap, just in time. By the time I hauled myself and the bag onto dry ground, I was soaked from the waist down and shivering violently. My coat was ruined, my shoes were destroyed, and I had mud caked up to my elbows. A sharp pain in my knee told me I had scraped it on something, probably a rock hidden beneath the surface. But I had the bag. I sat there on the bank, catching my breath, staring at the dripping leather satchel like it might explode if I touched it again. Water poured from its seams, forming dark puddles in the dead leaves around it. The brass clasp was tarnished, but still functional, glinting dully in the morning light. My hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. I knew that whatever was inside this bag was going to change something. I could feel it in my bones, that particular weight that settles over you when you're standing at the edge of something you can't come back from. I thought about Derek, waiting for me at home, probably wondering why I was taking so long on my morning walk. We had been married for 34 years, and he knew my habits as well as he knew his own. He would worry if I didn't come back soon. I thought about my 2 grown children, Marcus and Lily, both busy with their own lives, but still close enough that we talked every week. Marcus was a pediatrician in Seattle, married to a wonderful woman named Jenna, with 2 children who called me Grandma Mary. Lily was a journalist in Boston, single by choice, passionate about her work and fiercely independent. They were good people, my children. I had done something right in raising them. I thought about my mother, 3 weeks in the ground, and all the questions her death had left unanswered. The way she had seemed distracted in her final months, the way she had looked at me sometimes with an expression I couldn't read, the things she had started to say and then stopped, the words that had never quite made it out of her mouth. Then I reached for the clasp. The bag opened with a wet, sucking sound. I pushed back the leather flap and looked inside. My breath stopped. For a long moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. My brain refused to accept the evidence in front of my eyes, kept trying to rearrange it into something that made sense. But there was no way to make sense of this. I slammed the bag shut and scrambled backward, my heart racing so fast I felt dizzy. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to slow my breathing, trying to think, what had my sister done? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? I don't know how long I sat there on that muddy riverbank, staring at the bag like it was a coiled snake waiting to strike. The cold had seeped into my bones, but I barely felt it. My mind was too busy racing through implications, possibilities, explanations that might somehow make what I had seen less horrifying than it appeared. Finally, with trembling hands, I opened the bag again. I forced myself to look more carefully this time, to really examine what was there instead of reacting from panic and confusion. The first thing my eyes landed on was a stack of documents, their edges soggy and starting to blur, but still legible. I pulled them out carefully, spreading them on a relatively dry patch of leaves beside me. Legal papers, contracts, a thick document bound with a blue cover that I recognized immediately. My mother's will. I picked it up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The paper was wet, but intact, the words still readable. I scanned the first page, looking for the familiar language from the will that had been read at the lawyer's office 2 weeks ago. But this wasn't the same document. The letterhead was from Crawford and Associates, the law firm that had handled my parents' estate planning for as long as I could remember. That part was correct, but as I read through the pages, my confusion deepened into something much darker. This will was dated 6 months earlier than the one we had been shown, and the contents were nothing like what the lawyer had read to us. According to this document, the house on Willow Street, the one where Bridget and I had grown up, was supposed to go entirely to me. There was a life insurance policy I had never heard of, worth $400,000, also designated for me. And there was mention of a safety deposit box at First National Bank containing jewelry and important documents that should have been delivered to me within 30 days of my mother's death. I had received none of these things. The will we had been shown gave the house to Bridget, mentioned no life insurance policy, and made no reference to any safety deposit box. Bridget had inherited what we were told was the majority of our mother's estate, while I had received a modest cash bequest and some personal items of sentimental value. At the time, I had been hurt but not surprised. My mother had always seemed closer to Bridget, or at least that's what Bridget had always insisted. I had assumed the will reflected that preference, painful as it was to accept. But this document told a completely different story. My hands were shaking so badly now that I could barely hold the papers. Water dripped from my hair onto the already damaged documents, and I realized I was crying, though I couldn't have said exactly why. Grief? Shock? The dawning horror of realizing I had been betrayed by my own sister? All of them, probably. All of them at once. I kept pulling things from the bag. There were bank statements from accounts I didn't recognize, all in my mother's name, showing regular transfers to an account that belonged to something called Westbrook Holdings, LLC. I had no idea what that was, but something about the name made my stomach clench with suspicion. The transfers had been going on for years, according to these statements. Thousands of dollars every month flowing out of my mother's accounts and into this mysterious company. Had my mother known about these transfers? Had she authorized them? Or had someone been stealing from her for years without her knowledge? There were photographs, too, sealed in a plastic bag that had kept them mostly dry. I opened it carefully and spread them out, my breath catching as I recognized the faces. My mother? Much younger, maybe in her early 40s. A man I didn't recognize, dark-haired and handsome, with his arm around her waist. They were standing in front of a house I had never seen, laughing at the camera, looking like people in love. My father had died when I was 32, a heart attack that took him without warning on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He had been 61, still working at the insurance company where he had spent his entire career, still planning the fishing trips he and Derek were going to take when he retired. My mother had never remarried, never even dated as far as I knew. She had worn her wedding ring until the day she died, had spoken of my father with such tenderness that I never doubted her devotion. So who was this man? And why had my mother kept photographs of him hidden away for what appeared to be decades? I examined the photos more closely. There were about a dozen of them, spanning what looked like several years. In some, the man and my mother were alone. In others, they were with groups of people at what looked like parties or business functions. The clothes and hairstyles suggested the late 60s or early 70s, before my parents were married. That realization hit me hard. These photos were from before my father entered the picture, before Bridget and I were born, before the life I had always known began. This was a piece of my mother's history I had never known about, a relationship that had been erased from the family narrative. But if this man had been important to my mother once, why keep the photographs hidden? Why not just throw them away if she wanted to forget him? There was more in the bag. Letters, bundled together with a faded ribbon, the paper yellowed with age. I untied the ribbon and unfolded the first one, my eyes scanning handwriting I didn't recognize. "My dearest Diane," it began, "the days since I last saw you feel like years. I know we agreed that this was impossible, that too much stood between us, but I can't stop thinking about what might have been. If circumstances were different, if we had met first, before everything else complicated our lives." The letter went on, pages of passionate declarations and regret and longing. It was clearly a love letter, written by someone who had loved my mother deeply and had been forced to walk away from that love. I couldn't read any more. I folded the letter and put it back with the others, my mind reeling. My mother had had an affair, or at least she had been in love with someone who wasn't my father. The realization hit me like a physical blow, rearranging everything I thought I knew about my family, about my childhood, about the woman who had raised me. But that wasn't what made me want to throw up. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a piece of cloth that was now soaked through, was a smaller bundle of papers. I unwrapped them carefully, already dreading what I might find. It was a birth certificate, old, the paper fragile and starting to yellow at the edges. The document was creased from being folded and unfolded many times over many years, the corners worn soft from handling. The name on it was not one I recognized. Eleanor Grace Whitmore, born November 15th, 1970. That was 2 years before I was born. That was 2 years before my parents even met. According to the family story I had been told my entire life, the mother's name on the certificate was Diane Marie Holloway, my mother's maiden name. The father's name was listed as Thomas James Whitmore. I stared at that document for so long that the words began to blur, and not just from the water damage. My mother had had a child before she married my father. A daughter? A sister I had never known existed. What had happened to her? Where was Eleanor Grace Whitmore now? Was she still alive, somewhere in the world, not knowing that she had 2 half-sisters who had grown up without any knowledge of her existence? And why had my mother kept this secret buried for more than 50 years? I packed everything back into the bag, my movements mechanical, my mind struggling to process the avalanche of revelations. I needed to get home. I needed to dry off, warm up, and think clearly about what to do next. But even as I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me, one thought kept circling back. Bridget had thrown this bag into the river. Bridget had known about these documents, about the will, about the affair, about the secret sister. She had known, and she had been trying to destroy the evidence, which meant my sister had been lying to me for at least 3 weeks, possibly much longer. The will we had been shown was a fake, or at least not the most recent one. The inheritance I had accepted was wrong. Everything Bridget had told me since our mother's death was contaminated by secrets she had been actively trying to hide. The walk home took twice as long as usual. My wet clothes weighed me down, and I had to stop twice to rest, the bag feeling heavier with each step. The November air cut through my soaked jeans like knives, and by the time I could see my house at the end of the block, my teeth were chattering so hard I could barely keep them together. Derek met me at the back door, his face shifting from mild concern to alarm as he took in my appearance. "Meredith, what in the world happened to you?" He reached for me, pulling me inside, his hands warm against my frozen arms. "You're soaking wet. You're covered in mud. Were you in the creek? Did you fall in?" I couldn't answer him. I couldn't find the words to explain what I had seen, what I had found. I just stood there in our kitchen, dripping on the tile floor, clutching that bag like my life depended on it. "Honey, you're scaring me." Derek's voice had gone soft, the way it did when he was genuinely worried. After 34 years of marriage, he knew me better than anyone. He could see that something was very wrong. "Talk to me. What happened?" "I saw Bridget," I finally managed through chattering teeth, "at the creek. She threw this bag in the water and ran away." Derek looked at the bag, then back at me. His eyebrows drew together in confusion. "You went in after it? In this weather? Meredith, you could have gotten hypothermia." I had to know what was inside. "And?" His eyes were fixed on my face, reading every emotion that passed across it. "What was inside, Meredith?" "Get me some dry clothes first, and hot coffee. Then I'll show you everything." 20 minutes later, wrapped in a thick bathrobe, with a mug of coffee warming my hands, I spread the contents of the bag across our kitchen table. Derek had laid out towels to protect the wood, and he watched in silence as I arranged the documents, the photographs, the letters, the birth certificate. I explained everything as I showed him each item. The will that contradicted what we had been told. The bank statements suggesting years of financial manipulation. The love letters and photographs revealing an affair I had never suspected. And finally, the birth certificate that proved my mother had a daughter before she married my father. Derek listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "This is a lot to process," he said finally. "I know. According to this will, you should have gotten the house, and there's a life insurance policy here, $400,000. Derek picked up the document, scanning it again, as if he might have missed something. "Bridget got all of that. She said it was what the will specified." The will we were shown was different. Either it was forged, or there was another will that superseded this one. But why would Bridget throw this away? Why would she want to destroy evidence that the will was different? Derek was quiet for a moment, processing. "Because the evidence proves she lied. She got an inheritance she wasn't entitled to. If this will is legitimate and more recent than the one the lawyer showed you, then she's essentially stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from you." The word "stolen" hit me like a physical blow. I had known it, of course, had understood the implications from the moment I read that will, but hearing someone else say it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "But there's more." I pointed to the photographs, to the birth certificate. "Look at these." Derek examined them, his frown deepening. "Who is this man with your mother?" "I don't know, but those letters are love letters. Someone she was involved with, maybe before she married my father, maybe during their marriage. And this birth certificate." I picked it up, feeling again the weight of its implications. "Derek, my mother had a baby. In 1970, a daughter named Eleanor. I never knew she existed. Eleanor Whitmore, Derek read from the certificate. The father is listed as Thomas Whitmore. He looked at me, concern etched in every line of his face. Do you know anyone by that name? No, I've never heard it before. We sat in silence, both of us staring at the collection of secrets spread across our kitchen table. Outside, the morning had turned gray, clouds rolling in to block whatever weak sunlight had managed to break through earlier. The day felt heavy, oppressive, matching the weight that had settled in my chest. What are you going to do? Derek finally asked. It was the question I had been avoiding ever since I pulled that bag from the water. What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? Confront Bridget? Go to the lawyer? Try to find this mysterious Eleanor, if she was even still alive? I don't know, I admitted, but I can't pretend I didn't see this. I can't pretend everything is fine when my sister has been lying to me about our mother's estate. No, Derek agreed. You can't. He reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. But Meredith, you need to be careful. Whatever Bridget is hiding, it's serious enough that she was willing to destroy evidence to keep it buried. If you start asking questions, she's going to know something is wrong. Maybe she needs to know something is wrong, I said, hearing the edge in my own voice. Maybe she's been getting away with too much for too long. Derek didn't argue. He just held my hand and let me process, the way he always did when I needed to work through something difficult. It was one of the things I loved most about him, that steady presence, that willingness to be there without trying to fix everything before I was ready. I changed into warmer clothes and made myself eat some toast, even though my stomach was in knots and the thought of food made me feel sick. The documents were spread across the kitchen table now, the photographs and letters arranged in some semblance of chronological order. I kept coming back to that birth certificate, tracing the names with my finger like I might somehow absorb the truth through my skin. Eleanor Grace Whitmore, my sister, a sister I had never known, never met, never even heard mentioned in all the years of growing up in my mother's house. How was that possible? How did you hide an entire child for 54 years? Unless Eleanor had died. Unless something had happened to her as a baby, some tragedy that my mother couldn't bear to speak of. That would explain the secrecy, the buried grief that might have been too painful to share. But then why keep the birth certificate? Why keep the photographs of the man who was apparently Eleanor's father? If this was a wound too deep to discuss, wouldn't my mother have destroyed all evidence of it years ago? Unless she hadn't been able to. Unless some part of her needed to hold on to these remnants of a past she had tried to leave behind. The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, each answer leading to 3 more mysteries. I needed information. I needed to find out who Thomas Whitmore was, what had happened to Eleanor, and why my mother had kept all of this hidden for more than 50 years. I needed to understand why Bridget knew about it, and I didn't. That thought stopped me cold. How did Bridget find out? Had our mother told her? Had she discovered these documents some other way? And when had she discovered them, before Mom died or after? The implications of that question made my head hurt. If Bridget had known about the secret will before our mother's death, what else might she have done? Was it possible that she had somehow influenced the will that was read to us, made sure it said what she wanted it to say? That seemed paranoid, even to me. But 3 hours ago, I would have said it was paranoid to think my sister would throw a bag of evidence into a river. My baseline for what was possible had shifted dramatically. I pulled out my phone and typed Thomas Whitmore into the search bar. The results were overwhelming. Hundreds of people with that name scattered across the country. Impossible to narrow down without more information. I tried adding my mother's hometown, Fairfield, Connecticut, but that didn't help much either. The birth certificate listed a hospital in Hartford. I wrote that down, thinking maybe I could call and ask for records, though I had no idea if such records were even accessible after more than 50 years. I looked at the photographs again, studying the man's face. He looked to be around my mother's age in the pictures, maybe late 30s or early 40s. There was something familiar about his features, though I couldn't quite place it. The shape of his jaw, maybe, or the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Where had I seen that face before? The answer came to me suddenly, and it hit so hard that I actually gasped out loud. I ran to the living room, to the bookshelf where I kept the family photo albums. I pulled down the one from my childhood, the heavy leather-bound collection my mother had put together when I was in high school. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages, searching for a specific photograph. There. My mother's wedding photo, dated June 1972. She was standing next to my father, both of them young and beaming, her white dress simple and elegant, but there were other people in the photograph too, family members and friends who had attended the ceremony. And standing in the back row, partially obscured by another guest, was a man I hadn't thought about in decades, Uncle Thomas. He wasn't really my uncle. He was some kind of distant cousin of my father's, or maybe a family friend so close that the title was honorary. I remembered him vaguely from my early childhood, a quiet man who came to family gatherings occasionally and always brought me candy from a shop in Hartford that made the best chocolate-covered cherries I had ever tasted. He had disappeared from our lives when I was around 8 or 9, and when I asked about him, my mother had said he moved away and we lost touch. I had accepted that explanation without question, the way children do when adults tell them things. I looked at the man in the wedding photo, then at the photographs I had pulled from the river. The same jaw, the same smile, the same eyes. Thomas Whitmore wasn't a stranger. He was someone who had been part of our family, part of our lives. And if the birth certificate was accurate, he had been involved with my mother 2 years before she married my father. The timeline didn't make sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. My mother had been involved with Thomas. She had gotten pregnant. Something had happened, either to the relationship or to the baby. And 2 years later, she married my father instead. But Thomas had stayed in their lives, hovering at the edges, close enough that I remembered him from childhood, but distant enough that his disappearance hadn't raised questions. What had really happened between them? And what had happened to Eleanor? I needed to call someone who might know more, someone who had been around during those years, who might remember details that I had been too young to notice. My Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, now 83 and living in an assisted care facility in New Hampshire. She and my mother had never been close, but she had been at that wedding. She had known Thomas, had been connected to him through my father's side of the family. If anyone might remember the truth about what had happened back then, it would be her. But before I could reach for my phone, it rang in my hand. The caller ID showed Bridget's name, and my blood ran cold. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, watching it ring. I could ignore it. I could let it go to voicemail and deal with my sister later, after I had more information, after I had figured out what I was going to say. But some instinct made me answer. Some part of me wanted to hear what she would say, how she would act, whether there would be any hint in her voice that she knew I had seen her at the river. Hello? Meredith. Bridget's voice was tight, controlled, the way it always got when she was trying to manage a situation. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Where have you been? I went for a walk by the creek. I needed some fresh air. There was the briefest pause, so small I might have imagined it. The creek? In this weather? You must be freezing. I got a little wet. I'm warming up now. Another pause. Listen, I need to talk to you about Mom's estate. There are some papers I need you to sign, things the lawyer says have to be finalized before we can close everything out. What kind of papers? Just standard stuff. Release forms, tax documents, nothing complicated. Her voice was too casual, too deliberately unconcerned. We should wrap this up as soon as possible. I looked at the will spread across my kitchen table, the real will that said the house should have been mine. Can you send them to me? I'd like to look them over before I sign anything. It's easier if we just meet. I can come to your house this afternoon. We can go through everything together. Make sure there are no questions. The urgency in her voice was barely concealed. She wanted those papers signed. She wanted the estate closed out, finalized, untouchable. She wanted to make sure I couldn't find out what she had done. I'm not feeling well, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Let's meet tomorrow instead. At Mom's house, there are some things there I want to look through anyway. The house? Bridget's tone sharpened. What things? Photo albums, old letters, sentimental stuff. I've been putting it off, but I think I'm finally ready to go through Mom's belongings. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully measured. I've already started sorting through things. Most of it is junk. I was going to arrange for an estate sale next week. Without telling me? I was going to tell you. I just didn't want to bother you while you're grieving. While I'm grieving. As if Bridget had any idea what grief looked like. As if she had shed a single genuine tear since our mother died. She had been too busy counting her inheritance to mourn. I want to see the house before you sell anything, I said firmly. Tomorrow, noon, we can sign the papers then. I ended the call before she could argue. Derek was watching me from the doorway, his expression concerned. That didn't sound good. She wants me to sign papers to close out the estate. She's in a hurry. I bet she is. I looked at the documents on the table, the web of secrets that my sister had tried so hard to drown. I need to find out what happened before tomorrow. I need to know what I'm walking into. Call your aunt, Derek said. If anyone knows the truth about your mother's past, it's Patricia. I found Aunt Patricia's number in my contacts and dialed before I could lose my nerve. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered. Not Patricia, but one of the aides at her facility. Whispering Pines, how can I help you? I'm calling for Patricia Morrison. This is her niece, Meredith. Oh, yes, Mrs. Morrison has been asking about family lately. Let me get her for you. She'll be so pleased to hear from you. There was a shuffling sound, muffled voices, and then my aunt's voice came on the line, thin with age, but still sharp. Meredith? Is that you? I was just thinking about your mother. God rest her soul. The funeral was lovely, dear. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer to talk. Aunt Patricia, I need to ask you something important. Of course, dear. What is it? I took a deep breath. Did you know that my mother had a baby before she married my father? A girl named Eleanor? The silence that followed was answer enough. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. How did you find out about Eleanor? My heart was pounding. Then it's true. There was a baby. Meredith, this is something your mother never wanted anyone to know. She made me promise, made everyone promise. We were never supposed to speak of it. Not to you, not to Bridget, not to anyone. She's dead now, Aunt Patricia. And I found documents, a birth certificate. I need to know the truth. What happened to Eleanor? I could hear my aunt breathing on the other end of the line, the soft rasp of someone whose lungs weren't what they used to be. When she spoke again, there was a weight in her words that I could feel, even through the phone. Your mother loved Thomas Whitmore, loved him in a way she never loved anyone else, not even your father, though she tried her best to be a good wife. They met when she was young, barely 20. Thomas was older, already established in business, charming and handsome, but he was also married. Married to a woman who was very ill, bedridden for years with some kind of degenerative disease. Thomas stayed with her out of duty, but he and your mother fell in love. They had an affair that went on for nearly 2 years. Eleanor was the result. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. What happened to the baby? Thomas's wife died about a year after Eleanor was born. Everyone expected him to marry your mother then, to make things right, but his family wouldn't allow it. They were wealthy, influential, the kind of people who valued reputation above everything else. They threatened to destroy him financially, to take everything he had if he married a woman who had given birth out of wedlock. It was different then, Meredith. The scandal would have followed all of them forever. So what did they do? They gave Eleanor up for adoption. Thomas's family arranged everything, made sure the baby went to a good family far away where no one would ever connect her to them. Your mother was devastated. She told me once that she never fully recovered from losing that child, that some part of her died the day they took Eleanor away. My eyes burned with tears I hadn't expected. My mother, the woman who had raised me with such careful attention, had lost a baby, had been forced to give up her daughter because of scandal and family pressure and the cruelty of a world that punished women for loving the wrong person. Did she ever try to find Eleanor? After things had changed, after attitudes were different? I don't know, Patricia admitted. We never spoke of it again after the adoption. It was too painful for her, too raw. Your mother married your father 2 years later, had you and Bridget, and seemed determined to bury the past. But I always wondered if part of her was waiting, hoping that someday Eleanor would come looking for her. Bridget, I said suddenly, did Bridget know about this? Another long pause. Not that I'm aware of. Why? I found the birth certificate in a bag that Bridget was trying to destroy, along with a different version of Mom's will, one that leaves everything to me instead of being split between us. Aunt Patricia, I think Bridget has been lying about the estate. I think she forged a new will to steal my inheritance. Oh, dear. My aunt's voice was heavy with disappointment, but not surprise. That girl has always been jealous of you, Meredith. Even when you were children, she resented that you were older, that you got things first, that your mother seemed to favor you. I always worried it would come to something like this. Did Mom favor me? Your mother loved you both, but you reminded her of herself, I think. Bridget reminded her of other things, things she didn't want to be reminded of. What do you mean? Patricia hesitated. Bridget has always had a certain coldness to her, a calculating quality. Your mother saw it, even when Bridget was a child. She used to say that Bridget was too much like Thomas's family, the ones who had forced her to give up Eleanor. I never quite understood what she meant by that, but I think it troubled her. After I hung up with Aunt Patricia, I sat for a long time in the gathering darkness of my living room. Derek had gone to the store for groceries, giving me space to process, and the house felt impossibly quiet. My mother had a secret daughter. My sister had been systematically lying to me about our inheritance. The world I thought I knew had shifted beneath my feet, and I wasn't sure where solid ground was anymore. The thing that kept coming back to me, though, wasn't the money. It wasn't even the betrayal by Bridget, though that wound was fresh and raw. It was Eleanor. Somewhere out there, I had a sister I had never met, a woman in her mid-50s, my mother's firstborn child, who had lived her entire life not knowing where she came from. Had she ever wondered about her birth parents? Had she ever tried to search for them? Was she still alive? I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Eleanor Grace Whitmore, born November 1970, Hartford, Connecticut. The adoption records would be sealed, but there were other ways to search: DNA databases, genealogy websites. The internet had made it possible to find people who didn't want to be found, and I had to hope it could help me find someone who might have wanted to be found all along. It was nearly midnight when I finally stumbled onto something, a genealogy forum where someone with the username eWhitmore1970 had posted 3 years ago asking for information about birth parents with a connection to Hartford. The post read, "Looking for biological family. Born November 1970, Hartford area. Adopted as an infant through private arrangement. Any information appreciated." My hands were trembling as I created an account and sent a private message. I kept it simple, not wanting to overwhelm her. If this was really Eleanor, "I may have information about your birth family. Please contact me if you're still searching." Then I closed the laptop and went to bed, though sleep was a long time coming. The next morning, I woke to a notification on my phone, a response to my message. "I'm still searching. Who are you?" I typed back, "My name is Meredith. I believe we may be sisters." The response came within minutes. "Can you call me? My number is—" My hands were shaking as I dialed. The phone rang twice, then a woman's voice answered. "Hello? Is this Eleanor?" "Eleanor Mitchell now. I've been married for 30 years. There was a pause, a breath. "You said we might be sisters? What do you mean?" I told her everything. About my mother, about the birth certificate, about Thomas Whitmore, about the bag in the river, and the secrets my sister had been trying to hide. Eleanor listened in silence, and when I finished, I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. "I've been searching for so long," she said finally. "I knew I was adopted, but my parents never told me anything about where I came from. When they died, I started looking, but every lead turned into a dead end. Our mother kept everything. Your birth certificate, photographs of your father, letters they wrote to each other. She never forgot you, Eleanor. She kept those things hidden because they were too precious to throw away. Can I see them? Can I see her face? I'll send you photographs, and I want to meet you in person. Would that be okay?" "More than okay." Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "I've waited 54 years for this." I met Eleanor Grace Whitmore, now Eleanor Mitchell, at a coffee shop in downtown Hartford 2 days later. Derek had offered to come with me, but I felt like this was something I needed to do alone. Bridget still thought I was coming to our mother's house to sign papers. I had called her that morning and said I was sick, pushing our meeting back a few days. She hadn't sounded happy about it, but she hadn't pushed. Eleanor was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. I recognized her immediately, and not just because she had sent me a photograph in our exchanges. She looked like our mother. The resemblance was startling. The same cheekbones, the same shape of the eyes, even the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. She was 54 years old, with silver streaking through her dark hair and laugh lines around her mouth that suggested a life full of joy, despite everything. When she saw me approach, she stood up. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, two strangers connected by blood and secrets, and a mother neither of us had really known. "Meredith." Her voice was soft, slightly hesitant. "You look like her too, like the photographs I was able to find." "You found photographs?" "Just a few, from newspaper archives, community event coverage, things like that. I've been searching for years, but adoption records from that era are almost impossible to access. I had nearly given up hope of ever finding anything." We sat down across from each other, and Eleanor told me her story. She had been raised by a loving family in Ohio, had known from a young age that she was adopted, but had never been given any information about her birth parents. Her adoptive parents had been kind people, school teachers who couldn't have children of their own, and they had given her a good life. "They were wonderful," Eleanor said, her voice soft with memory. "Ruth and Benjamin Mitchell. They told me from the beginning that I was chosen, that they had wanted a baby so badly, and I was the answer to their prayers. I never doubted that they loved me." "But you always wondered about your birth family?" "Always. Even when I was very young, I would look in the mirror and wonder who I looked like. My adoptive parents had light hair and blue eyes, and I had this dark hair and these dark eyes, and I knew I came from somewhere else. Someone else." She took a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts. When I was a teenager, I started asking more questions. Where was I born? Who were my biological parents? Why had they given me up? Ruth and Benjamin told me what little they knew, which wasn't much. A private adoption, they said, through a lawyer who handled these things. The birth mother was young and unmarried and couldn't keep her baby. That was all they were ever told. Did you resent them for not knowing more? No. I understood that it was different then, that adoptions were handled differently, that there weren't the resources we have now for finding people. And they were so clearly my parents in every way that mattered. But I always felt like there was a piece of me missing, a piece I couldn't find no matter how hard I looked. When did you start seriously searching? After they died. Ruth went first, cancer, when I was 42. Benjamin followed 2 years later, heart attack. I think he just couldn't bear to be without her. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears. After I buried him, I finally had access to all their papers. I went through everything, looking for any clue about where I came from, and I found the lawyer's name. And that led you to Hartford? Eventually. The lawyer had died years before, but his records were still on file somewhere. I hired a private investigator who specialized in adoption searches. She traced the paperwork back to a hospital in Hartford, confirmed my birth date and the fact that I had been born there, but everything else was sealed. Dead ends everywhere I looked. She reached across the table and took my hand. And then, you found me. After 54 years of searching, you found me because of a bag in a river. I squeezed her hand, feeling the connection between us, the shared blood that neither of us had known about until days ago. I'm glad I pulled it out. I almost didn't. I almost just walked away. But you didn't. Why not? I thought about that question because I had to know the truth. Whatever it was, however painful, I had to know. I've spent my whole life not knowing things, not asking questions, accepting whatever story I was told. But something about that bag, something about the way Bridget was trying to destroy it, made me realize I couldn't do that anymore. I told her what I had learned from Aunt Patricia, about Thomas Whitmore, about the affair, about the forces that had conspired to tear her away from our mother. Eleanor listened with tears streaming down her face, not bothering to wipe them away. She loved me, she said when I finished. She didn't want to give me up. No, she didn't. And Thomas, my biological father, he died about 15 years ago, according to what I've been able to find. I'm sorry. Eleanor nodded slowly, absorbing another loss she hadn't known she had. At least I know now. At least I understand. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps of each other's lives. Eleanor was a retired nurse, had been married for 30 years to a man named Harold who taught high school history. They had 2 sons, both grown now, both with families of their own. She had grandchildren I hadn't known existed, a whole branch of family that had been hidden from me my entire life. When I finally told her about Bridget, about the bag in the river and the forged will, Eleanor's expression hardened. She was trying to erase me, she said, to make sure no one ever found out about my existence. I think she was trying to protect herself. The will I found, the real will, left everything to me. If that will had been probated instead of the fake one, Bridget would have gotten nothing. And if the story of your existence came out during the estate settlement, there might have been questions about your claim to the inheritance too. Eleanor shook her head. I don't want any money. I never wanted money. I just wanted to know where I came from. But Bridget didn't know that. She couldn't take the risk. So what are you going to do? It was the question I had been wrestling with since I pulled that bag from the water. What was I supposed to do with the truth? Confront Bridget and risk a complete break in our relationship? Go to the authorities and potentially see my sister prosecuted for fraud? Try to forget everything I had learned and move on with my life? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I know I can't pretend this never happened. I can't let her get away with lying about our mother's wishes. Eleanor reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was warm, strong, the grip of someone who had survived difficult things and come out stronger on the other side. Whatever you decide, you don't have to do it alone. I'm here now. We're family. The word hit me differently than it ever had before. Family. Not just the family I had been given, the one that had lied to me and manipulated me and tried to steal what was rightfully mine. But the family I was choosing, the one built on honesty and connection and the willingness to face hard truths together. I called Bridget that evening and told her I would meet her at our mother's house the next day. My voice was calm, giving nothing away, but inside I was churning with equal parts anger and grief. Finally, Bridget said, I was starting to think you were avoiding me. I'm not avoiding you. I've just had a lot to process. Well, bring the signed papers. I want to get this estate wrapped up as quickly as possible. I'll bring what I need to bring, I said, and hung up before she could ask what that meant. I arrived at my mother's house a few minutes early, parking in the driveway where I had parked hundreds of times before. The house looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier. The gutters needed cleaning, and the paint was starting to peel around the window frames. 3 weeks of neglect since my mother's death had already started to show. Bridget's car was already there, and I could see lights on in the living room. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage, reminding myself why I was doing this. Eleanor was sitting in a hotel room across town, waiting for my call. Derek was at home, ready to come if I needed him. The documents from the bag were in my purse, protected in plastic sleeves against any further damage. I was not alone. I was not helpless. I was not the woman who could be manipulated and lied to without consequence. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. Bridget opened it before I could knock, her face arranged in an expression of sisterly concern that I now recognized as completely false. Meredith, you look tired. Are you sure you're feeling well enough to do this today? I'm fine. I stepped past her into the house, looking around at the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, the accumulated evidence of a lifetime. I have some things I want to discuss before we sign anything. Of course, whatever you need. Bridget followed me into the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her makeup perfect, her hair styled. Looking at her now, knowing what I knew, I wondered how I had ever missed the coldness beneath her polished surface. I sat down on the couch and pulled the documents from my purse. Bridget's eyes went wide when she saw the water-stained will, the birth certificate, the photographs. Where did you get those? Her voice was sharp, all pretense of warmth evaporating. From the bag you threw in the river 4 days ago. Bridget's face went pale. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words and failing. I don't know what you think you saw, she finally managed, but whatever that is, it's not what you think. Really, because it looks like our mother's real will, the one that leaves the house and the life insurance policy to me, not to you, and this birth certificate for Eleanor Grace Whitmore, our mother's first child, the sister we never knew we had. Mom didn't have another child. That's ridiculous. I talked to Aunt Patricia. She confirmed everything. Mom got pregnant before she married Dad, had the baby in secret, was forced to give her up for adoption. She kept these documents hidden for 50 years, and somehow you found them and decided to destroy them. Bridget's composure was cracking. I could see panic flickering in her eyes, the look of someone whose carefully constructed lies were falling apart. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. I was protecting this family. I was protecting you. Protecting me from what? From knowing the truth about our mother? From receiving the inheritance she wanted me to have? Mom wasn't in her right mind when she wrote that will. Bridget was pacing now, her movements jerky, and uncontrolled. She was confused. She didn't know what she was doing. I found those documents when I was cleaning out her house after she got sick, and I could see immediately that they would cause nothing but trouble. So you hid them, and then you somehow got a different will made, one that gave everything to you. Bridget stopped pacing and turned to face me. The mask was completely off now, and what I saw beneath it chilled me to the bone. The lawyer owed me a favor. It wasn't hard to have new documents drawn up. Mom was barely lucid at the end. She would have signed anything I put in front of her. You forged her signature on a fraudulent will. I did what needed to be done. Bridget's voice was cold, defiant. You've always been the favorite. Even when we were kids, everything was always about Meredith. Meredith's grades, Meredith's accomplishments, Meredith's perfect family. I was invisible. I was nothing. And then I find out that Mom has been hiding a secret child for 50 years, and even in her will, she's still choosing you over me. This isn't about being chosen, Bridget. This is about what's right. Right? She laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. What's right is that I finally got something. For once in my life, I got to be first. I got the house. I got the money. I got to matter. By stealing from me, by lying to everyone, by trying to erase the existence of a sister who never did anything to hurt you. That woman is nothing to us. She's been gone for over 50 years. She doesn't deserve anything. She deserves the truth. She deserves to know that our mother loved her and never wanted to give her up. She deserves to be part of this family. You've already contacted her, haven't you? Bridget's voice was dangerous now. You've been digging into this behind my back. I met her 2 days ago. Her name is Eleanor Mitchell now. She's a retired nurse with a husband and 2 sons and grandchildren. She's a good person, Bridget. A person who spent her whole life wondering where she came from. For a moment, I thought Bridget might cry. Her face crumpled, and I saw something beneath the anger and the defensiveness, something that looked almost like grief. But then the mask came back down, harder than before. Fine, she said. Do whatever you want, but don't expect me to be part of it. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have any sisters. Not you, not Eleanor, no one. She grabbed her purse and walked past me toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. You always thought you were better than me, Meredith. Turns out you were right. Congratulations. Then she was gone, and I was alone in our mother's house, surrounded by memories and ghosts and the weight of secrets that had finally been dragged into the light. The next few months were among the most difficult of my life. I hired a lawyer and started the process of contesting the fraudulent will. It was expensive and emotionally draining, and there were moments when I wondered if it was worth the cost. My attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Winters, who specialized in estate litigation, warned me from the beginning that these cases could be complicated. Family disputes over inheritances are always messy, she said during our first meeting. People have strong emotions about what they think they deserve, and when fraud is involved, the stakes get even higher. Are you prepared for this to potentially take years? I don't care how long it takes, I told her. My mother had wishes for her estate, and my sister ignored them. She stole from me. She tried to destroy evidence. I can't let that stand. Catherine nodded, making notes on her legal pad. I understand, and based on what you've shown me, I think we have a strong case. The will you found is clearly dated after the one that was probated, and there are enough inconsistencies in the probated will to raise serious questions about its authenticity. But I need you to understand that your sister will fight this. She'll hire her own lawyers. She'll challenge every piece of evidence. She'll try to make you look like the unstable one. These cases can get ugly. She was right. The case got ugly very quickly. Bridget's lawyers filed motion after motion, challenging the authenticity of the documents I had found, questioning how I had obtained them, even suggesting that I had fabricated evidence to steal an inheritance from my rightful heir sister. They hired handwriting experts who claimed they couldn't definitively prove the signature on either will was genuine. They subpoenaed medical records suggesting my mother had been too cognitively impaired to create a valid will in the months before her death. Every hearing was a battle. Every document request led to weeks of waiting and review. The legal fees mounted, and there were nights when I lay awake wondering if I was throwing good money after bad, if I should just let Bridget keep everything and walk away. But every time I thought about giving up, I would remember the look on Eleanor's face when I told her our mother had loved her. I would think about what it meant to honor the wishes of someone who could no longer speak for themselves. And I would find the strength to keep going. Derek was worried about me. I could see it in the way he looked at me when I came home from meetings with Catherine, exhausted and discouraged. He never suggested I should give up, but he made sure I knew he would support whatever decision I made. "This isn't just about the money, is it?" he asked me one night, about 6 months into the legal battle. We were sitting on the back porch, watching fireflies blink in the darkness, and I had just finished telling him about the latest motion Bridget's lawyers had filed. "No, it's not about the money at all, really. We have enough money. We've always had enough." "Then what is it about?" I thought about that for a long moment. It's about the truth. It's about making sure that when someone lies and cheats and steals, they don't get away with it. It's about my mother and what she really wanted, and the sister she lost 54 years ago who deserves to know she was loved. I turned to look at him, and in the dim light, I could see the concern in his eyes, but also the pride. And it's about me, about not being the person who looks away when something is wrong because confronting it is too hard. Derek took my hand. "Then we keep fighting. Even if it takes years. Even if it takes years." The legal case was complicated by the fact that Bridget had covered her tracks well. The lawyer who had helped her create the fake will had died of a heart attack 6 months after my mother, taking his knowledge of the fraud with him. But there were still inconsistencies, still evidence that something wasn't right, and my attorney was confident we would eventually prevail. Eleanor came to visit me twice during the proceedings, bringing her husband Harold and photographs of her sons and grandchildren. We spent long weekends together, getting to know each other, filling in the missing pieces of our family history. By the time she left after each visit, it felt like we had known each other our whole lives. "I'm glad you pulled that bag out of the river," she told me during her second visit as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. "I'm glad you didn't just walk away." I couldn't walk away. Some things are too important to ignore. Even when it cost you your relationship with Bridget? I thought about that for a moment. Bridget made her choice a long time ago. She chose to lie, to steal, to put herself above everyone else. I didn't cause that. I just refused to be a victim of it anymore. Bridget and I didn't speak during those months. She had moved to Arizona with Graham, supposedly for his work, but probably to put distance between herself and the mess she had created. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her marriage was struggling, that Graham had found out about the fraud and wasn't happy about it. Part of me felt a dark satisfaction at that news, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the sister I had lost, sad for the relationship we might have had if things had been different. Derek was my rock through all of it, steady and supportive, and never once suggesting that I should just let it go. Our children rallied around me too, Marcus flying in from Seattle several times, Lily calling every day to check on me. The family I had built with love and honesty stood firm while the family I had been born into crumbled. The case was finally resolved. 11 months after I pulled that bag from the water, the judge ruled in my favor, finding that the will Bridget had submitted to probate was fraudulent, and that my mother's earlier will, the real one, should govern the distribution of her estate. The courtroom was crowded the day of the final ruling. Derek sat behind me, his hand on my shoulder. Eleanor had come from Ohio to be there, sitting beside him with her husband Harold. Even Marcus had flown in from Seattle, and Lily had taken time off from her job in Boston. My family, the real one, the one that had chosen to stand with me through all of this. Bridget was there too, on the other side of the room, flanked by her lawyers. She looked different than she had a year ago. Thinner, older, the polish worn away to reveal something tired and defeated underneath. Graham wasn't with her. I had heard through mutual friends that he had filed for divorce 3 months earlier, unable to accept that his wife had committed fraud and unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Judge Rebecca Martinez was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had clearly grown frustrated with the legal maneuvering on both sides. When she delivered her ruling, her voice was firm and direct. After reviewing all evidence presented in this matter, I find that the will submitted to probate on November 15th was not the most recent expression of the decedent's wishes. The handwriting analysis, while inconclusive on its own, combined with the testimony of multiple witnesses and the documented inconsistencies in the probated will, leads me to conclude that the earlier will presented by the petitioner represents the true wishes of Diane Holloway. She paused, looking directly at Bridget. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that the respondent was aware of the earlier will and deliberately concealed it in order to inherit assets she knew were not intended for her. This court takes a dim view of such behavior. The estate will be distributed according to the earlier will, and this court orders the respondent to pay all legal fees incurred by the petitioner in bringing this matter to light. I heard a sound from across the room, a sharp intake of breath that might have been a sob. Bridget was staring at the judge with an expression of disbelief, as if she couldn't quite accept that her carefully constructed lies had finally fallen apart. I got the house. I got the life insurance money. And I got something more valuable than either of those things, the knowledge that I had done the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it would have been easier to look away. After the ruling, as the courtroom emptied, Bridget walked past me on her way to the door. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected anger, resentment, the cold hostility that had characterized our interactions for the past year. But what I saw instead was something different, something that looked almost like relief. "It's over," she said quietly. "Finally over." "Bridget," I started, not sure what I wanted to say, but she shook her head and kept walking. The courtroom doors closed behind her, and that was the last time I saw my sister for nearly 2 years. I didn't keep the house. It held too many complicated memories, and besides, Eleanor and I agreed that it should be sold. We split the proceeds, even though she insisted at first that she didn't want anything. "This was our mother's legacy," I told her. "It belongs to both of us." With my share of the money, I set up college funds for Eleanor's grandchildren, the nieces and nephews I had never known I had. With her share, she established a scholarship for adopted children searching for their biological families. It felt right, using our mother's estate to help others find the connections that had been denied to Eleanor for so long. Bridget reached out once, about 2 years after everything was settled. A letter, not a phone call, written in her careful handwriting on expensive stationery. "I know you probably won't read this," she wrote, "and I don't blame you if you don't. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, not just for what I did with the will, though I'm sorry for that too. I'm sorry for all of it, for being jealous, for being resentful, for never seeing you as anything but competition. I spent my whole life feeling like I wasn't good enough, and I took that out on you. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, and I'm sorry." I read the letter several times, trying to decide what to do with it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to refuse to acknowledge any apology from a woman who had tried to steal my inheritance and erase my sister from existence. But another part of me remembered the little girl Bridget had been, always trying so hard to be noticed, always feeling like she fell short. I wrote back, a short letter, not offering forgiveness exactly, but acknowledging her apology and leaving the door open for future communication. I didn't know if we would ever have a relationship again, but I wasn't willing to close that possibility entirely. What I had learned from all of this was that family was complicated. It wasn't just blood or obligation or shared history. It was also choice. The choice to be honest with each other, to show up when it mattered, to forgive when forgiveness was warranted, and to hold boundaries when it wasn't. My mother had kept secrets because she thought it was the only way to survive in a world that judged women harshly for their mistakes. Bridget had lied because she was consumed by jealousy and resentment that had never been properly addressed. Eleanor had spent decades searching for a family she had been denied through no fault of her own. And I had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is pull something from the water, even when you don't know what you'll find inside, even when the truth is hard and ugly and painful, even when it would be easier to just walk away and pretend you never saw anything, because the truth has a way of surfacing eventually. And when it does, you have to decide what you're going to do with it. I chose honesty. I chose justice. I chose to honor my mother's real wishes, even though it cost me my relationship with one sister while gaining another. The morning after I sent my reply to Bridget's letter, I drove out to Henderson Creek. It was early spring, 3 years since that November morning when I had watched my sister throw a bag into the water. The willows were just beginning to bud, their branches trailing in the water like green streamers. I sat on the same bench where I had been sitting that day, watching the water flow past. So much had changed since then. So much had been lost and found and transformed. Eleanor had called the night before to tell me she was coming to visit again, bringing her whole family this time. Her sons wanted to meet me, wanted to know the aunt they had never known existed. Her grandchildren wanted to hear stories about their great-grandmother, the woman whose secrets had shaped all of our lives. And Bridget had sent another letter, this one longer, more honest about the pain that had driven her to do what she did. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. Not yet. She was asking for understanding. She was asking if maybe, someday, we could try again. I hadn't decided what to do about that yet, but I was thinking about it. I was open to the possibility. A cardinal landed on a branch nearby, its red feathers bright against the new green leaves. It tilted its head and looked at me, then flew away over the water. I thought about my mother, about all the secrets she had carried for so long. I thought about the daughter she had been forced to give away, now found and loved, and part of my life. I thought about Bridget, still struggling to become the person she wanted to be. I thought about Derek and Marcus and Lily and all the grandchildren still to come. Family is complicated. It's messy and painful and beautiful and worth fighting for. Even when fighting for it means pulling a dripping bag from a river and forcing yourself to look at what's inside, even when the truth is something you never expected to find. I stood up and walked home, leaving the creek to carry its secrets toward the sea. Behind me, the cardinal was singing, and somewhere in Ohio, Eleanor was packing her bags to come visit the sister she had spent 54 years waiting to find.